This isn't a story about revenge. I want you to understand that before I go any further. What I did wasn't about settling a score. It was about making sure my son knew that someone in this world saw exactly who he was and refused to let anyone take that from him. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a small commercial real estate firm from nothing, and I have one son. Just one. His name is Paul. Paul is 34. He's quiet in the way that some men are quiet. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they learned early that the people around them weren't really listening. He got that from his mother, God rest her. She passed when he was 19. After that, it was just the two of us for a long time. He met his wife, Renee, when he was 28. I liked her at first. She had a way of making a room feel warm when she walked in. Her family was from Connecticut, old money, the kind that doesn't announce itself but makes sure you feel it. Her father, Douglas Hale, owned a mid-sized logistics company out of Stamford. About 40 employees, regional contracts, nothing flashy but solid. He made sure you knew about it within the first 10 minutes of any conversation. The wedding wasn't. Paul looked happy. I flew in from Phoenix and I sat in the front row and I watched my son get married and I thought, okay, he's gonna be all right. I was wrong. Not right away, but eventually. They settled in Connecticut, close to her family. Paul had been working in project management. Good at it, organized, steady under pressure. When Renee's father offered him a position at Hale Logistics, Paul came to me first. We talked about it for a long time over the phone one Sunday evening. I told him what I honestly thought. Family and business are a hard mix, but if the offer is genuine, it can be an opportunity. Just keep your head down, learn the operation, prove your value on your own terms. He called me 3 weeks after his first day, said it was going well, said he was learning the routing systems, said Douglas seemed pleased. I should have asked more questions. I visited 8 months later, flew into Hartford on a Thursday, rented a car, planned to surprise Paul at the office and take him to lunch. It was Renee's idea, actually. She'd texted me the week before saying Paul had been stressed and she thought a visit from me would lift his spirits. I didn't think anything of it. I just packed a bag. The Hale Logistics office was in an industrial park off Route 1, a modest 2-story building, brick, with a gravel parking lot that needed resurfacing. I walked in through the front entrance and told the receptionist I was there to see my son. She gave me a look I didn't quite understand, a flicker of something, pity maybe, or discomfort. She said she'd let him know I was there and pointed me toward a row of plastic chairs along the wall. I waited maybe 4 minutes, and then Paul came around the corner. He was wearing a gray work shirt, the kind with the company name embroidered on the chest. He had a bucket in one hand and a long-handled scrub brush in the other. There was a smell about him that I recognized after a second. Industrial cleaner, bleach. He stopped when he saw me, just stopped. I watched his face go through 5 different things in about 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion. Something I can only describe as shame, and that one hit me somewhere behind the sternum and didn't let go. And then, because he is his mother's son and he cannot help it, his eyes filled. He didn't cry. He blinked it back. But I saw it. "Dad," he said, "I didn't know you were coming." I stood up. Renee thought it would be a nice surprise. He looked at the bucket in his hand. He set it down slowly, like he was hoping I might not notice it, even though it was already too late for that. "This is just temporary," he said. "We're short-staffed in maintenance and Douglas asked me to help out until they hire someone." I nodded. I kept my voice easy. "Sure," I said. "How long has it been temporary?" He didn't answer that. We were standing in the hallway like that, him in his work shirt, me in my sport coat, neither of us saying the real thing, when Douglas Hale came down the stairs. He was a tall man, Douglas. Broad-shouldered, white-haired, the kind of face that had probably been handsome once and now just looked expensive. He dressed well. He always dressed well. He saw us and he smiled, and the smile was wrong in a way I couldn't immediately name. "Edward," he said, extending his hand. "Didn't know we'd have a visitor." "Surprised me myself," I said. He looked at Paul. He looked at the bucket on the floor. And then he looked back at me, and he said it so easily with that same wrong smile still on his face. "Your boy's been a real workhorse. Doesn't flinch at anything." He paused. "Bathrooms, break room floors, the loading dock. Give him a mop and he figures it out. Guess it's just what he knows how to do." He said it like it was a compliment. I looked at my son's face. Paul was staring at the floor. His jaw was tight. He was 34 years old, and he was standing in a hallway holding a scrub brush, and his father-in-law had just described him to his own father like he was the help. I said, "He's always been good at figuring things out." I smiled. Douglas smiled. Paul didn't. "We were just heading to lunch," I said. "Paul, grab your jacket." I didn't ask permission. I didn't look at Douglas again. I put my hand on my son's shoulder and I walked him out of that building. We sat in my rental car in the parking lot for a moment before either of us spoke. How long? I asked. He exhaled. 6 months. 6 months of maintenance work. It started as 1 week. They had a pipe burst, the regular guy called out. Douglas said it would just be a few days. He rubbed the back of his neck. Then it just kept going. Every time I tried to talk about moving into operations like we originally discussed, he'd say it wasn't the right time, or there wasn't a role open, or that I needed to understand the business from the ground up. He looked out the windshield. I've learned the ground floor pretty well by now. And Renee? He was quiet for longer than I expected. She says I need to be patient, he said finally. She says her father respects people who aren't too proud to get their hands dirty. I didn't say what I was thinking. Not then. We went to lunch. We talked about other things. I watched my son eat a club sandwich and make jokes and try to seem fine, and I kept thinking about the look on his face in that hallway. That look I hadn't seen since he was a teenager, when something happened at school that he was too proud to tell me about, but that I could see had gotten under his skin and stayed there. I drove him back to the office afterward. I hugged him in the parking lot and told him I'd call that evening. I watched him walk back inside. He was still wearing the gray shirt with the company name on the chest. I sat in that parking lot for a while after he disappeared through the door. Then I took out my phone and I started making calls. But not the kind Douglas Hale would have expected. I've spent 30 years in commercial real estate. That means I know accountants, attorneys, lenders, brokers, and more than a few people who know how to find information about a company that isn't advertised on any website. It's not a glamorous network. It's just what you accumulate when you spend 3 decades doing business honestly and treating people well. The first call I made was to a friend of mine named Alan, who had spent 20 years doing commercial lending before retiring to consult. I asked him if he knew anything about Hale Logistics. He didn't, but he knew someone who did. It took me about 2 weeks of quiet conversations to start getting a real picture. Hale Logistics was in trouble, not visibly. Douglas was good at keeping up appearances, but the numbers told a different story. They'd lost 2 of their anchor contracts in the past 18 months. One had gone to a larger regional carrier. The other had ended when the client filed for bankruptcy. The company's revenue was down nearly 30% from its peak. They were burning through a line of credit that had been extended twice. The building they operated from was mortgaged against the business, and that mortgage had been refinanced at terms that weren't favorable. Douglas Hale wasn't a man who had money to throw around. He was a man who was very good at appearing like he did. I sat with that information for a few days. I thought about what I wanted to do with it and, more importantly, why. I want to be honest here. I'm not a vindictive person. I don't enjoy hurting people. What I felt when I sat in that parking lot after dropping Paul off wasn't anger exactly. It was something quieter and colder. It was the particular feeling a father gets when he realizes that someone has been systematically dismantling his child's sense of himself, one small humiliation at a time, and calling it opportunity. That's what Douglas had done. He'd offered Paul a position and then used that position to make him feel small, to establish a hierarchy in his own home, to make sure his daughter's husband understood exactly where he ranked. And Renee had let it happen. Maybe she'd even agreed with it. I'm not going to pretend I knew everything, but I knew enough. I flew back to Hartford 6 weeks later. I hadn't told Paul I was coming. This time I wasn't there to take him to lunch. I had a meeting with the majority shareholder of a small private equity group out of New Haven. His name was Lewis, and we'd done business adjacent to each other years ago on a warehouse deal in Bridgeport. He was sharp, straightforward, and when I laid out what I'd found on Hale Logistics, and what I thought the company's real asset value was underneath the current management's debt load, he listened. We talked for 2 hours. Then we talked again 2 days later. Then I made a decision. I had liquid assets from the sale of 2 commercial properties I'd divested the previous year, roughly $3.1 million sitting in accounts that were earning next to nothing. I'd been meaning to redeploy that capital somewhere. I hadn't found the right thing yet. I found it. The structure we put together was not complicated. Lewis's group would approach Hale Logistics as a potential buyer for a minority partnership stake, a lifeline for a company that quietly, desperately needed one. Douglas would think he was getting an infusion of capital from an outside investor to stabilize the business. What he would actually be getting was a transaction that gave Lewis's group a controlling interest in the company's governance, with my capital backing the deal and a seat at the table for me as a silent partner. We paid about $2.7 million for a 58% stake. Given the company's debt position and the leverage we had, it was a fair price. The closing happened on a Tuesday morning in a lawyer's office on Chapel Street in New Haven. Douglas was there with his own attorney. He shook hands all around. He seemed relieved. He didn't know I was involved. That was intentional. My name was behind an LLC that had been set up 6 weeks prior, and I'd specifically asked Lewis to keep my involvement quiet until we were ready to be not quiet about it. The Tuesday after closing, I asked Lewis to call a general staff meeting at Hale Logistics for Friday morning. All hands, 9 a.m., mandatory attendance. I drove up from the hotel I'd been staying at Thursday night. Got there a few minutes before 9. The parking lot was fuller than usual. Paul was there. He was standing near the back of the main warehouse floor with a small group of other employees. He was wearing his gray work shirt. He looked confused about why a general meeting had been called. He looked a lot more confused when I walked in. "Dad?" He actually took a step toward me. "What are you? How are you?" "Give me just a few minutes," I said quietly. "We'll talk right after." I walked to the front of the room. Douglas was standing off to the side with his arms crossed. When he saw me, the color left his face in a way that I found, I'll be honest, quietly satisfying. Lewis stood up and introduced himself. He explained that Hale Logistics had entered into a partnership agreement with his group the previous week, which most employees had already heard a version of. He then explained the governance structure. He said that decisions going forward would reflect the priorities of the majority stakeholders. Then he introduced me. I kept it brief. I said I was a private investor who'd been involved in the deal from the beginning and that I was looking forward to working with the team. Then I looked at Douglas and I said that the first order of business for the new ownership was to conduct a review of all management positions and that we'd be meeting individually with each manager over the coming days. I said that effective immediately, Paul. I said his name directly, and I watched Douglas's jaw tighten, would be transitioning out of his current role and into operations, reporting directly to Lewis's team rather than to any family member. I said it was past time his skills were actually put to use. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say anything that wasn't professional and measured. I didn't mention bathrooms or mop buckets or the way Douglas had smiled at me in that hallway 8 weeks ago. I didn't have to. After the meeting, I found Paul standing outside the building near the parking lot. He was very still. "You bought the company," he said. "Part of it, Dad." He stopped. "I don't even know what to say." "Then don't say anything yet," I said. "How are you doing?" He laughed. A short, slightly disbelieving sound. "I genuinely don't know." We stood there in the October air for a minute. A few leaves had come down overnight and they were scattered across the gravel. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "What?" "I need you to think very carefully about what you actually want your life to look like." I turned to look at him. Not what someone else decided it should look like. Not what's convenient or what keeps the peace. What you actually want. He was quiet. "I've been so worried about letting everyone down," he said, "that I stopped thinking about that. I know Renee is going to be." He started and stopped. "I know," I said again. He didn't say anything else about Renee for a while. But in the weeks that followed, things became clear that I think had been unclear to him for longer than he'd admitted to himself or to me. The marriage had been in trouble for a while, not because of money or his job or Douglas, but for reasons that went back further and cut deeper. Renee and Paul separated 3 months after that Friday morning in the warehouse. It wasn't easy. I won't pretend it was easy. He called me on a Tuesday night from his apartment. He'd gotten his own place in Hartford, and he was quiet for a long time before he said, "I think I should have seen this coming a long time ago." I told him that most of the things we should have seen coming are the ones we love too much to look at directly. Douglas resigned from the company 4 weeks after the acquisition. Lewis and his team brought in a new general manager. Under new leadership and with the debt restructured, the company stabilized within a quarter. It wasn't a dramatic turnaround. Those usually aren't as dramatic as people expect, but the bleeding stopped. Paul is now in operations at Hale Logistics, doing exactly the work he was originally promised. He's good at it. The team there has noticed. His name comes up in conversations with Lewis as someone with real instincts for the business. He came down to visit me in Phoenix last spring. We sat on the back porch in the evening and we talked about his mother and about the years after she died, and about all the things we hadn't said to each other during that time. He asked me why I hadn't told him what I was planning with the company. I told him the truth. I said I was afraid that if I told him, he'd have tried to stop me. He'd have said it wasn't necessary or that he could handle it himself or that I shouldn't spend my money on something like this. He said he probably would have said exactly those things. I said I know. He thought about that for a moment. Then he said, "Did you ever actually feel bad for Douglas?" I considered the question seriously. "No," I said. He nodded. "Me either." We sat there a while longer. The desert cooled down around us the way it does in late evenings, slow and then all at once. He looked like himself. That's the only way I know to put it. He looked like the person I remember him being before those years in that gray work shirt with another man's name over his heart. I didn't do it for revenge. That's what I keep coming back to. I did it because I'm his father, and I had the means, and there was a man in a hallway who looked at my son like he was nothing, and smiled at me while he did it. And some things you cannot let stand. Not because of pride, not because of money or ownership or any of it. Because he is my son. And that in the end is all the reason there ever needs to be.